Have you ever looked down at your phone or computer and then immediately gotten distracted and forgot why you did so? Quick show of hands, be honest. Yes? Okay, everybody. That used to be my job. It was my job to take you out of your world and bring you into mine. Because once we had your attention, we're very good at keeping it. And the longer we can keep it, the longer we can sell advertising against it. And it was around doing this that I realized the entire industry of the attention economy was working exactly this way. That there was this boundless competition to steal your time and as much of it as possible. And I realized that as architects of our digital world, we need to be better. Because we can be. And we can see that these systems have been designed with intricacy so that companies can keep our attention indefinitely. I don't want to keep crushing these freaking candies. I don't want these alerts to completely command me. I don't care if that panda bear is dancing. Well, maybe. With a hula hoop. Okay, this is fantastic. I have to share this with my 10 friends and 10,000 strangers. Caption, who wants to throw a panda rager? Great, let me go back about my life. For God's sakes, I'm trying to right swipe my wife. It's been 30 seconds and just 2 Facebook likes. Or is that just 2 for which I've been notified? Let me go back and check inside and see whose likes it tried to hide. They don't show them all. I wonder why. This panda's dancing. And another video plays after automatically. This one of a gopher that stage turns dramatically. It's like my attention is kept systematically raptured by algorithms that know exactly what I want. Or not what I want, just what I'll watch. And the people behind this intelligent design genuinely want to better our lives. But their bonuses just so happen to be tied to keeping time on site exceptionally high. And now even my news apps have been gamified. And what am I, not gonna click that one simple sex tip guaranteed to blow her mind? When we talk about the dangers of advertising, we're often talking about body image and the messaging itself. And I think that's the wrong problem. I want to talk about this, about the primary business model of the attention economy, in which the more of your time we can steal, the more money we make, with absolutely no limit. And you might be thinking, who cares? So what if all of these companies, So what if all of these companies, if Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, the entire news industry, every gaming company, even meditation apps have to compete for our attention? Who cares? People have been doing that forever, right? And they have to compete to give us the best stuff. And in practice, yes. But in reality, unfortunately, no. This isn't a new problem. The problem is that we've gotten so good at it. As we've carried around these devices in our pockets and we've gotten so good at perfecting the tactics to steal and hold as much of your time as possible, that it's starting to be a threat to our news system, it's starting to be a threat to our way of life. And so that begs the question of how well really do these companies know us? And so there was a study recently by Michael Kaczynski out of Stanford University, and he found that with just 10 Facebook likes, if we just knew 10 pages you've liked, he could tell aspects of your personality better than the average coworker. With 150, he knew you better than your mom. With 300, better than your average spouse. And these are just pages you've liked. This is not everything you've ever clicked on, hovered over, and how long you've clicked on it, and how long you've hovered over it, everything you've shared, how long you've spent stalking your ex-girlfriends and boyfriends on Facebook and Instagram. All of that data is what Facebook has, but wasn't available to him. And yet he was still able to know us better than our spouses. He essentially concluded that our smartphone is a vast psychological questionnaire that we are constantly filling out, both consciously and unconsciously. And when we hear this sort of stuff, we think, okay, like whatever, they know us really well, like that's fine. They're not making me do anything I don't want to do. But I'd like to argue today that as humans, we are persuadable. There are some things that just work at getting and keeping our attention that we wouldn't have done otherwise. And we think we can't be fooled. But there are some things that just work. There are some ways in which we are just deceivable as humans. And so, okay, so when each company, when all of the attention economy companies that are stealing, that are fighting for our time, when they know us so well, when they live in our pockets, when they profit off of our time, and they're willing to do whatever works to get it, what world does that create? And we'll start to see that what works isn't necessarily what's good or what we actually want. There's a difference between what I want and what I'll watch. So what works to keep you engaged in scrolling? If you spend the most time on Facebook when you're angry and lonely, then that algorithm, as it's optimizing to keep you there for as long as possible, is optimizing to keep you angry and lonely. And it's not because there's someone evil at Facebook sitting behind a screen saying, aha, I want to ruin your emotions. No. These people are doing their jobs, and they're doing it really well at keeping you on their site. But the consequence is our emotional state. And I want to show you a quick video that just sort of gives you a sense that we're not really the customer in these ecosystems. We're the product. And I think this shows that quite well. Make them laugh, cry, wow, and buy. That's what the algorithms are optimized for. They don't inherently care about us. Of course, the people at Facebook want to make us happy in some regard, but we're not the primary shareholder. The advertisers are. And what works starts to then very fundamentally change the stories that we tell. So, as we're posting on Facebook, as advertisers, we're measuring, as news organizations, we're measuring what's effective, what is working in this system right now. And we start to see, that anger is really doing quite well. And then, pretty much every article we see on Facebook is some version of this headline, right? This is why you should be angry. Click here to feel right about why you're angry. That's pretty much what it's become, because that works. And we start to do what works, but is that news? Similarly, what works has absolutely nothing to do with truth. People are making $10,000 a month just straight up making things up and putting them in front of people who are willing to believe them, it confirms their suspicions, it confirms their bias. It's a very profitable industry. I don't know if you've seen one of these articles of the Pope endorses Bernie Sanders or the Pope endorses Donald Trump. The Pope does not endorse presidential candidates. But they're convincing. They're convincing because they're in front of people who are very willing to believe them. And when it works, it happens a lot. Over the months leading up to the election, there was more fake news from fake news sites than mainstream news sites. And granted, what counts as mainstream news is up for debate. I'm willing to concede that for sure. But the amount of information being created and shared from a straight up did this happen or did this not happen standpoint is staggering. And once this happens, it's very hard to undo. There's a very real cost. Because a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. By the time any sort of correction is issued, by the time people get any sort of right information, it's too late, if it even does reach them in the first place. And just a quick side, another persuasive tactic for making people believe something is to put it on a black background with someone's face in front of it. There's absolutely no evidence that Mark Twain said this quote. But I found that online. I didn't make that. It's just people put things in front of things that make it work. Onto a separate Mark Twain quote. It's easier to fool people than convince them they've been fooled. This is part of why this is such a challenge. Is because once people are in these zones, once they believe what they believe, it's so hard to bring people out of that indoctrination. And you may have guessed it this time, but also not Mark Twain. And unfortunately, it's not just fake news. Real organizations, real supposedly prestigious news organizations are subject to all of the same factors. And they have to resort to this exaggeration, to playing into bias, to stirring up fear and outrage, because it works. And they know if they don't do it, their competitors will. So they feel like they have to be in this game of stealing our time and starting to really break that system. 2 examples here. One from the New York Times, one from the New York Times and one from Fox. New York Times came out with this article talking about how murder rates are rising sharply in many U.S. cities. It was later Nate Silver, who's a statistician, really criticized them sharply for presenting misleading statistics. But it creates fear. It's a very clickable. This article will do what will do better than its tame counterpart. And then on the right, suspect in Quebec mosque terror attack was of Moroccan origin. There was an attack. He was not Moroccan. But if he is Moroccan, that does better. And to that audience, that is something that works. That is a more profitable headline than its alternative. And so finally, what works also creates different realities. This one is one of the most sort of dear to my heart, I think, is a challenge, and that I asked two friends, Ali and Taylor, to Google how many refugees committed crimes in Europe. And they pretty much got two different answers to that question. They asked the question into Google. Ali on the left is receiving articles that say, 56% of Syrian refugees committed severe crimes, 200,000 crimes committed in Germany in the last year. These are very misleading statistics. And then on the right, Taylor is getting information about how refugees are not dangerous and how there have been no attacks in the US. They put the same question into Google, they get a different output. These people are essentially living in two different worlds. They have different versions of what reality is, because personalization is yet another tactic that works. It keeps us engaged and spending more time. But is this really what we want out of our news, out of our information, out of our internet? And it's not just Google here, it's Facebook, it's all of the people we've been talking about are dabbling in personalization in one way or another, because it works. And if they don't, their competitors will. And that's why this advertising model is so dangerous. And so we have this idea that the internet is free, right? There are all these free services, and it's so wonderful. But what's the real cost of free? What is the real cost of getting all of our information without paying for it? Because I'd like to argue that it's siloed realities. It's not being able to trust news or each other, because we're getting our information from news, so then how do we know who we can trust there? And this war of distraction, of having to fight off thousands of people whose job it is to break down our self-control because it's their job to get our time. And it ultimately creates this angry, polarized population, this place that we're in now. It's created a world where the best engineers and developers, they have to use their talents to manipulate our emotions and steal our time. It's created a world where news organizations can't afford to value truth to the extent which is necessary for a democracy to function. It's created a world where we're constantly fighting for control of our own minds against this persuasion, and where we have different versions of what reality is. I'd like to argue that's a very expensive cost for all of these free services. And so how do we fix this? Luckily, we have three companies that really are uniquely positioned with prime opportunity to do so. But step one is that we have to separate profits from how we spend our time. The game can't be, how do we take up as much of your time as possible, because this is the cost of doing that. But what if we maximize something else? What if we maximize things that really mattered to us? What if, imagine a world that doesn't compete for your attention, but instead competes to help you thrive? And it's hard to imagine exactly what that would look like, so I want to give a couple examples. You have someone making minimum wage trying to provide for their family. Imagine if all sorts of companies were competing, doing what works to help them accomplish that, where the goal weren't about how do we steal as much of your time, but how do we help you do something that truly matters to you? What if dating apps weren't measuring their success in how many swipes we had? What if they were measuring what works to help us find meaningful relationships, or whatever you're looking for? What if news organizations weren't competing for our time and clicks? We didn't have to compete to the base instincts, to the race to the bottom of our brainstem. What if instead they were competing to do what works, to inform us about the world around us, to tell us what matters, not just what's scary? Starts to get into the questions of what is news? Why do we have news? We've come a long way from that. Similarly, what if this algorithm that knows us so well on Facebook, better than we know ourselves in some senses, what if it were doing everything that works to help give us what matters to us? Doing everything that works to help us spend time with the people we care about. Facebook could take us all on like the greatest night out of our lives. It knows so much about our surroundings. It knows so much about us. I could just hit a take me on an adventure button. That would be awesome. And similarly, when you go to Facebook for news, as too many of us do, it can start to think about that same question. What is news for? What are we actually optimizing for? What works to inform this person, not just keep them? And the challenge here, as many of you are probably thinking, is, well, okay, how do these companies make their money? But it's not as bad as you think. Facebook makes about $1.61 per person per month. That's $1, 2 quarters, a dime, and a penny. That's the cost of a lot of this world that we're living in. If we start to be willing to pay for services that truly bring us value, and I'm not recommending we pay for Facebook now, I don't want to do that. But if companies do start to offer us real products that are enhancing the world that we live in and measuring their success based on how well it affects our lives, we're going to need to be willing to pay for that. And as customers, we're on the hook for that as well. But it helps us stop being the product and start being the customer. And so we have to fix this quickly, because every day that we don't, we're being driven further and further apart. We're getting more and more polarized. This is a critical issue, but we can do it. We can stop maximizing time spent. We can get that off of the table as the metric that matters the most, and we can start basing things on human values. We can change from time spent to time well spent. Architects of our digital world, you have more data, information, and control over our attention, the tools to tweak our emotions so we'll return to your experience. But is that what we should do? Or should you build digital tools so advanced they can actually enhance the world outside the device in our hands? Can we add so much value that it lets us put our phones back in our pants as fast as we possibly can? Not time-sucking, time-giving innovation. That's what it means to be truly technologically advanced. The future is not all screens. It's humanity enhanced. Thank you.